Let's dive deep into some fascinating stuff today, talking all about sexual desire and satisfaction. We're going to be unpacking a YouTube video, a really cool one actually, by the amazing sex educator, Dr. Emily Nagoski.
Oh, she's brilliant.
Isn't she just? It's called Good Sex Explained in 9 Minutes. Pretty ambitious, right? But she pulls it off. And we've got our expert here to help us unpack it all.
Excited to be here.
I feel like there's so much talk about sex out there, but how much of it is actually, accurate? Like, this video really made me question a lot of stuff I thought I knew, like how desire is supposed to work.
Oh, for sure. Dr. Nagoski, she debunks this idea she calls the desire imperative, which is basically this myth that we should all just have this spontaneous desire all the time, always be ready,
Yeah, like walking down the street, seeing an attractive person, and bam, you're ready to go. Is that what's supposed to happen?
That's the myth.
Yeah.
But we should be constantly in this state of, burning desire.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is. And that's not even getting into the anxiety it can cause when people feel like they're not measuring up to that expectation.
Totally. So I guess what Dr. Nagoski is proposing instead is this responsive desire.
Right, exactly. So that means that desire, it doesn't have to just appear out of nowhere, It can actually be a response to experiencing pleasure.
Well, so you don't have to wait for that like magical spark. You can just get things going and the desire will follow.
It can, yeah. It kind of flips the script, right? And for
Yeah.
some people, that can be a huge relief because that pressure to always be in the mood, it can really weigh on you.
Oh, yeah. No, I get that completely.
Yeah.
So it's not about forcing it. It's about creating the space for it to happen naturally.
Yeah, exactly.
So then how did we even get this desire imperative idea in the first place? Where'd all that pressure come from?
Well, that's a big question with a lot of complicated answers. But I think it's interesting to look at how the field of sex therapy itself has changed over time. You can kind of see these shifting ideas about desire reflected in that.
Ooh, now that's a history lesson I can get behind.
So early on, sex therapy was really focused on the mechanics of sex, like the arousal, the plateau, orgasm, all those physiological processes.
And desire wasn't even part of the equation.
Not really, no. It was kind of overlooked.
Wow. I mean, you'd think that would be a pretty central part of the conversation.
Right. But it wasn't until the 70s that the brilliant Helen Singer Kaplan, she's a sex therapist, she realized that something was missing and added desire into the model.
I bet that was a big deal.
It was. And it was really important because it acknowledged the role of the brain in all of this. It's not just about what's happening physically. It's about our thoughts, our emotions, even our subconscious beliefs about sex.
So it's all connected, mind and body.
Exactly. And that brings us to this really interesting model from the Kinsey Institute, the dual control model. It helps us understand how the brain and the body work together when it comes to, sexual response.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What's this dual control model all about?
So think of it like this. We've got an accelerator and brakes when it comes to getting turned on. The accelerator is like your sexual excitation system. It's picking up on all the things that turn you on, a touch, an attractive sight, even just a thought.
So those things that get the sparks flying. I like it. So what about the brakes?
So the brakes are your sexual inhibition system, and they're kind of scanning for reasons why you might not want to be turned on.
Like what?
It could be stress, worry about how you look, even past experiences that were negative, or maybe you're just tired.
Oh, yeah. So it's almost like our brains are running a risk-benefit analysis. Like, is this a good time to be turned on or not?
Exactly. It's not as simple as flipping a switch. And this is where context becomes really important. Like our external circumstances, but also our internal state, those play a huge role in how we experience pleasure.
That makes sense.
Right.
I mean, think about being tickled. In some situations, it's fun and playful, right? But if you're in the middle of an argument, it's just annoying. Same sensation, but the context changes everything.
You got it.
So it sounds like what we really need to focus on is creating the right context to get those accelerators going and maybe ease up on the brakes a little bit.
And that's where Dr. Nagoski's idea of pleasure is the measure comes in.
Oh, yeah. I love that part. Is it like she's giving us permission to redefine what a good sex life actually means?
It is. It's about focusing on what feels good and letting go of all those external pressures and expectations.
So how do we actually put that into practice? Where do we even begin?
So I guess it all starts with self-awareness, right? Like really becoming a student of your own body, understanding what feels good, what doesn't.
For paying attention to those sensations, figuring out what actually turns you on.
Exactly. And remembering that dual control model, those accelerators and brakes we were talking about.
Oh, yeah, right. The accelerators being all the things that get us going, and the brakes, the things that, kind of put a stop to it. It's like a constant back and forth in our brains.
Yeah. Yeah. And a big part of creating that pleasure-ready context is getting to know your own personal accelerators. What are the things, the sights, the sounds, the smells even, that really do it for you?
Okay, so it's like making a list of everything that gets your engine revving. Ooh, that could be fun.
It can be, yeah. And it can be anything, from a specific type of music to a certain fabric to even just a way of being touched.
That's so interesting. It really is so different for everyone. There's no right or wrong answer.
Not at all. And once you start to figure out what those things are for you, then you can start to, I don't know, maybe bring them into your life more intentionally.
Oh, I like that. So it's like taking control, creating the conditions for pleasure.
Exactly.
Oh,
And this isn't just for partnered sex either. This applies to solo exploration too.
that's a good point. Self-love is important too.
It is.
Okay, but what about the breaks? How do we deal with all the stuff that blocks our desire?
Well, like we said, awareness is key. Got to know what those triggers are before you can really start to do anything about them.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's easy to get down on yourself. Like, why am I feeling this way? What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
But really, I guess those breaks are there for a reason, right?
They are. Often they're trying to protect us from something. Maybe it's a real danger. Maybe it's just a feeling like being overwhelmed or something. But understanding why those breaks are there, that's the first step.
So it's not about fighting them. It's about understanding them.
Right. So say stress is a big one for you. Maybe you start incorporating some relaxation techniques into your day, like meditation or deep breathing.
Oh, yeah. Or if you're struggling with body image stuff, maybe you seek out some body positive resources.
Exactly. It's about creating a more supportive internal environment, like being kind to yourself, allowing yourself to feel good.
Yeah, because you deserve it.
Exactly. And this whole thing, it's a process, right? It's not like you just flip a switch and bam, you're a pleasure pro. It takes time. It takes experimentation.
And patience.
Lots of patience. And if you're in a relationship, it's so important to bring your partner into this process.
Communicate, right?
Yeah, talk about what you're discovering, what you're struggling with.
And if it's too much or too difficult to navigate on your own, there's always the option of seeing a therapist, right?
Absolutely. It can be really helpful to have that kind of guidance and support.
Totally. So whether you're partnered or flying solo, it's all about making pleasure a priority, listening to your body, and honoring what feels good.
You got it.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling super inspired after this conversation.
Me too. Hopefully our listeners are feeling inspired as well, to take what Dr. Nagoski is saying and apply it to their own lives.
Yeah, to explore their own sexuality with more curiosity, more compassion, and a whole lot more pleasure.
Absolutely.
Why don't we take a quick break here to let all this goodness sink in, and when we come back, we'll talk about some practical strategies for putting all this into practice. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. We've talked about debunking those myths and the science behind desire. Now let's get practical. How do we actually use all this great info?
It's about putting it into action, right? We were talking about creating an environment where pleasure can actually thrive. And that means figuring out our own unique pleasure blueprint and working with those internal accelerators and brakes.
Yeah, like really understanding what turns us on, those unique triggers, the sights, smells, sounds.
It's about becoming more aware of those things, the sensory experiences that really work for us. Could be something like the feel of silk on your skin or the smell of fresh bread, even just the sound of rain.
It's so individual, right? Like what works for one person might not do anything for someone else.
Totally. It's all about figuring out what works for you. Once you start to get a sense of that, you can bring those things into your life a little more intentionally.
Like creating your own personal pleasure menu.
Exactly. Being proactive, creating a more pleasurable, sensual environment, whether it's lighting candles, putting on music, or even just taking the time to really savor a meal.
It's about being present in those moments and appreciating all those little things that make you feel good.
And it's not just about setting the mood for partnered sex. It's about bringing that awareness and appreciation for pleasure into your everyday life.
It's like a mindfulness practice, but for pleasure.
I like that.
Okay, so we've got the accelerators down, but what about those brakes? The things that can, kill the mood. What do we do about those?
Well, we got to start with awareness, right? You can't really deal with something if you don't even know what it is. And it's not about beating ourselves up. It's about being curious and compassionate.
Yeah, realizing that those brakes are usually there for a reason, right? Like they're trying to protect us in some way.
Exactly. Could be from a real danger or maybe just a feeling of being overwhelmed or something.
So understanding why they're there, that's the first step.
Right. And once you have a better sense of those triggers, then you can start to think about how to manage them. So if stress is a big one for you, maybe you start incorporating some relaxation techniques like meditation, deep breathing, even just taking a bath.
Or if it's body image stuff that's getting in the way,
Hmm.
maybe you look for some body positive resources. Work on self-love.
That's it. It's about creating that supportive internal environment, being kind to yourself, allowing yourself to feel good.
Because we all deserve to feel good.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not going to be perfect right away. It's a process. You got to experiment, be patient with yourself, and figure out what works for you. And if you're in a relationship, it can be really helpful to involve your partner in this process.
Oh yeah, communication is key, right? Talking about what you're learning, what you're struggling with.
Exactly. Create that space for open communication, mutual respect, and understanding.
And hey, if it feels like too much, there's always the option of reaching out to a therapist.
Totally. Sometimes it can be really beneficial to have that kind of professional guidance and support.
This has been so eye-opening, and honestly, I feel so much more empowered to actually, take control of my own pleasure.
Me too. And hopefully our listeners are feeling that way too, taking what we've learned from Dr. Nagoski and applying it to their own lives.
Exploring their sexuality with more curiosity, more compassion, and yeah, a whole lot more pleasure.
You said it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave you with this question. If pleasure is the measure, what does that mean for your definition of a fulfilling sex life? What small step can you take today to move toward that vision? Until next time, happy exploring.